Let's get lit. Ilene Prusher takes you behind the words and beyond.
Every day, every day, every day, every day I write the book. Every day, every day, every day I write the book.
Yehoshua is one of Israel's most prominent novelists and anchor of what some people would consider the Holy Trinity, including David Grossman and Amos Oz. Avram B. Yehoshua, as he is known in Hebrew, is also an essayist, a playwright, a university professor, and a social commentator. He's the son of a fifth-generation Jerusalemite family, the author of 11 novels, 3 books of short stories, 4 plays, 4 collections of essays, and most recently also the book Achizat Moledet and the new novel Nitzevet, which is in Hebrew, will soon be coming out in English. His most recent book in English is called The Retrospective, published by Halban Publishers in London. I won't mention all the prizes, but let's just throw out a few. The Altman Prize, the Bialik Prize for Literature, the Israel Prize for Hebrew Literature, the National Jewish Book Award, shortlisted in 2005 for the Man Booker International Prize. Aleph Bet Yehoshua, it is a pleasure to have you here as our guest on TLV1's Let's Get Lit.
Thank you.
Let's start with the Retrospective, your most recent book. It's a very moving book, and one of the things that struck me is that the main character, Yair Moses, reminds me, or what I imagine to be, something of you as a film director. He's a filmmaker and he's a professional storyteller like you. How often have your characters been autobiographical, and how much of yourself is in Yair Moses?
I think this is the book in which I try to explore some of the question of creation, of artistic creation, that I am, of course, occupied with all my life. So I was waiting a long time in which I choose my characters as a garage owner, as a doctor, as a lift engineer and other profession. And then I came to this profession of art, but I try to do it not through a writer, because it is so many books about writers who are writing and finding a manuscript of a dead writer and doing all these things about the writing. I was choosing a filmmaker, a director, in order to, I would say, explore the 4 function of a writer, meaning in the same time he is doing the plot, in the same time he has to do the order like a director. He is an actor because he has to represent the characters in his books, and he is also a photographer because he has to bring landscape and houses and to do. So I took all these functions that are existing in me as a writer and split them into 4 or 5 protagonists that are in the novel, and try to find the dynamics and the dialogue between them as they are inside myself. I put it in different characters.
Now, in the book, some of the films are dubbed into Spanish, and he goes to Spain and to go to a retrospective of his films. And sometimes he doesn't quite recognize and says, is this my film? Because there's a kind of alienation once your work is rendered into another language. And Bialik once said reading poetry in translation is like kissing through a veil. I want to ask you about that idea of your book and your many books in translation. We're doing this, of course, as I'm inviting you to a conversation in English. But I'm wondering, do you feel that your work ever gets, lost in the nuances of it? Sometimes get lost in the translation, and I'll say that with praise to the translator Stuart Schaffman, who's a very deft and talented translator. But there are still times when I read a book of an Israeli author in English, and people say, aval fisfast, you missed something if you didn't read it in Hebrew.
I think that in translation you gain something and you lose something immediately. When I read Dostoevsky, of course, there are something that are queer and bizarre and fantastic, but for a Russian that was reading these books in the 19th century, it was something very common and very usual from his environment. The question in retrospective wasn't the question of translation as such. I don't check my translation. I count on my translators. I know only 2 foreign languages, English and French, and here I can check very roughly. The question in retrospective was that he is coming to a retrospective of his films, but they choose his very ancient films that was done with a very special cineast, Trigano, a special person who was, I would say, tempting him to do films, and it was fantastic films, grotesque, absurd, unmature in a certain way, and he saw them in the retrospective, but they were dubbing, it means in Spanish. And I wanted to demonstrate that the creator does not know exactly what he was doing. And this is, we have to take it for granted, that the creator, if they are painter or writers or filmmaker, they are not the ultimate judges of their creation. They can, when they interpret their creations, this is only one interpretation that can stand with other interpretation. So and this was coming to me in my life, and I saw it also from my friends, that many times when they got an interpretation coming from outside, they were amazed. Say, yes, I didn't meant it, but they say, yes, find in the text and you see that it is existing. This is a good sign for a work of art if the unconscious was working in it. If the unconscious was working in it, it means that, I would say, good and raw and important material was coming. And this may, I would say, demonstrated by the fact that the creator himself doesn't understand totally his work.
Fascinating. Now, for example, when you read, your first novel, Mot Zaken, The Death of an Old Man, or Mr. Mani, do you sometimes come across things and think, oh, did I write this? This was so long ago. This is kind of another era of Aleph Bet, Yehoshua.
Yes, in a certain time, of course, you are developing with time, but I will give you something very special with Mr. Money. I wrote Mr. Money for 3 years. This I consider my most important novel. And I wrote all the time, Mr. Money, money, money. It was coming every day, money. When I finished the novel, there was an interviewer that was coming to me and said to me, why you choose the name Money? I said, I don't know, I just took it as a, Oriental name coming from the Orient. And he said to me, no, but money is ma'ani. What am I? I was stunned. I was shocked. Writing for 4 years the name money and don't realize that it can be interpreted as ma'ani, who I am.
So someone else found a chidush in your own work.
So the most obvious things, ma'ani, what I am, this was escape from my mind. But writing it for 4 years without even imagining that ma'ani is ma'ani.
Fascinating. You know, when you talk about a character who's from your past, I'd like to ask you, coming from someone who's a new novelist, I've had published one book and I have this character named Nabil, and now that it's published and he's out there in the world, I feel I kind of miss him. I miss being in his world. And I wonder, do you ever feel that with your characters? Like you kind of, you live with them for a while, you kind of breathe in their bodies and walk in their shoes, and then you have to kind of send them out into the world almost like children, and
Yes,
you miss them.
Exactly, children, and this is the reason why you are so upset and you are so worried with when the novel is coming out. So it was under your control, totally under your control. And here the baby is going out, and everyone can hit him, and everyone can spit on him, and everyone can interpret it differently. This is one of the most, I would say, difficult period. And they are full of anxiety. And I know it from many very important writer. You can think they are confident, they know already, they are old people, they have done many works. The last novel is always, the last creation is always under a question mark. And what you have done before, it's not for you, but it is against you. Because people would say, now, okay, your previous novels were far more better than this one. And you get, attacks and things like that. It is very, very, so if you start, you have to understand that you start in a very difficult way.
So let's talk then about your new baby, even though some of our listeners will be waiting for it to come out in English. But in Nitzevet, you write about a woman who doesn't want children, and some of the people around her perceive this as a kind of an assault on the Israeli Zionist ethos. All women should have children. We have to be fruitful and multiply and keep up with the demographic threat. Tell us a little bit about the backdrop of this story.
There is now a situation, I would say more in Europe than in Israel, that people don't want to bring children. In Europe, you see it very often when people are deciding if it is man or woman. It's not only a question of women, it is also a question of men. They don't want children. This is by itself, of course, it is a sign of decadence, of decline, of people that don't believe, not only don't believe in the future, but also are becoming so egoist and so, I would say, detached from the responsibility towards society that they don't want to bring children. Now, this is the character I choose, and she's a harpist. She play a harp. It's a very, very difficult instrument, a harp, and she decided already. I mean, she was married with a very, very loving person, and he really loved her so much, and he wanted so much to help her with this difficult instrument. And she decided in a certain time that perhaps this love will dominate her in such a way that if she will have common children with him, it will be very difficult to separate from him. I don't know, she decided not to bring children. And the novel is starting with a very special situation. She is playing in an orchestra in Holland because there are not so many positions of harpists in the orchestra in Israel. And then her father died, and her brother wanted that her mother will come from Jerusalem to be with him in a house of old people. I don't know how you say it in English, a diur mugan.
Yeah, sort of retirement home or old age home.
Old age, it's very
assisted living, I think, is the more politically correct term now.
Yes, because if you say old people, they are becoming nervous.
Right.
So he wants her to be near him because he can take care of her easily. She is living in a kind of a religious quarter in Jerusalem, and he says, it's an old apartment, I want you to come here. She doesn't want to leave Jerusalem, but she accepts to try for 3 months to be in this place, to try to see what is the situation. Now he called his sister, Noga, he called her to come to keep, because she wants that someone will be in her old apartment to keep the apartment. And she comes for 3 months only to Israel to be in this apartment alone, apartment of her childhood, in order to keep the apartment. There are some difficulties here I don't want to now to enter. Anyhow, in this, she's coming already, nobody asked about her decision not to bring children. It is already this decision that was done. And little by little, because her brother say to her, what you will do this 3 months without anything, you will be in kind of a vacation without payment, so I will give you position of extra. This is extra in some of films, opera, and things like that. So she said, I don't have nothing to do in Israel, so I will do this thing. And by doing position and playing extra in some sort of production, little by little, her decision that was already determined and absolute not to bring children is, I would say, is attacked by different positions, by different things that are not directly to the discussion why you are not bringing children. I don't want now to tell all, of course, the story of the novel, but
Well, we don't want to spoil it for the reader.
I wanted very much to see that some decisions that we have taken already, and we are confident that these decisions are finished, and we are convinced that these are decisions that will not be reversed. Slight things that are coming from outside, that are not directed to the thing itself, can change, can do this slight change. Because in our lives there is not dramatic change. The way in which the process of slight changes, this is the most interesting thing in life, and I wanted to track it in my novel.
It's fascinating, especially as there are lots of women today, as you said, in Europe and Israel who struggle with this issue. You know, women who decide not to have children are kind of, put into
Women
this
and men.
ostracization of
Yes.
women and men.
You know that in Israel it is not the situation like in Europe. In Israel, bringing children is more important than marriage. There are people that cannot marry, or they are not coming to marriage. I will not speak about homosexual and lesbian, etc., that are doing children, but also there are what we would say without marriage children. That is, children are becoming more important than marriage. This is a new phenomenon.
I hate to move the conversation away from this fascinating issue and literature, but I want to shift a little bit into politics and the current day. I spoke to you over the summer and we talked about you coming on the show, and you said, but I'll only end up talking about Gaza. So I want to just spend one question talking about it, and it's because of this. I found a series of correspondences you had with Gideon Levy from Haaretz, and there was one letter which reads as if it could have been written right now, but it was actually from the end of the war in 2009. And I'm just going to read a line or two from it. And you wrote, after all, you, Gideon, who live among the people, know very well that we are not bent on killing Palestinian children to avenge the killing of our children. All we are trying to do is to get their leaders to stop this senseless and wicked aggression. And it is only because of the tragic and deliberate mingling between Hamas fighters and the civilian population that children, too, are unfortunately being killed. And it goes on, and it reads exactly like it could have been written right now or this summer, but it's from 2009. I didn't notice if you were quite as vocal this summer as you were then in 2009, but I'd like, if I could, to just turn for a second to that series of correspondences you had, and how is it that 5 years on it's almost the same conversation?
First of all, I have a great respect to Gideon Levy, not for this kind of an articles, but of his documentary interview that he's going to the occupied territories. He was going to Gaza in the time and speak with the Palestinian and take some, I would say, very painful cases and present them to the Israeli public. This I have a great respect. He's a kind of a friend. Now, but when he was speaking about a war crime, that we are doing war crime in this year, in 2009, that we are doing a war crime. And he never said one word heard about the Hamas, who are doing the same thing. They are shooting on civilians. They are shooting on civilians. The fact that we can, I would say, shoot their missiles, it doesn't mean that they don't have an intention to shoot on civilians. So I was saying to him, you cannot do something like that. Explain to me why the Hamas is shooting. Because I was, of course, for the detachment from the Gaza area. And the fact that we put there 8,000 Jews in the refugees camps of 400,000 refugees, putting 8,000, a settlement of 8,000, it was craziness. And when Sharon was detaching himself from the Gaza, I was thinking this is the moment for the Palestinian in Gaza.
Do you feel any differently now? I mean, that was you're talking, of course, about disengagement in 2009. And Gideon Levy made pretty much the same arguments this summer. In one column, he said the purpose of the war is to kill Arabs, which, of course, created quite a stir. But I didn't notice a continued conversation, although I might have missed it. But I'd like to just kind of give you an opportunity to talk about that, or where you feel that this recent war leaves Israel for you.
But what was the situation? The situation of the Hamas was, if they, after the disengagement, they are free. For the first time, the Palestinians are governing themselves in a small area, but this is the first time. All the time they were under another government. Now they are free. Now build yourself. Take and restore yourself after what was happening. Demonstrate to the world that when the Israelis' occupation is out, now you can make your life normal. Instead, they accumulate thousands of missiles. And instead of building and trying to demonstrate, and this would encourage the Israeli also to do disengagement for the West Bank, they started with these crazy missiles that did not get anything. And by this action, they have, of course, I would say, make more difficult the fact to get out from the West Bank, because all the right-wing people are saying, what do you want? You want now missiles on Ben Gurion Airport and things like that. Now, but I see also the thought of Israel. We have to talk to them. When they have created the national government with the Abu Mazen and the Palestinian Authority, I was saying now Hamas is entering the kind of a peace process through the unity government, even if they don't intend, but they gave green light to Abu Mazen to go ahead with the negotiation. Israel has done, of course, the contrary. They cut relationship with Abu Mazen. They did not want to speak with the Hamas. We have to speak with the Hamas. Hamas is not a terrorist group, but an enemy. Enemy is not less than a terrorist group. When I was a child, I was sitting in shelter in Jerusalem when the Jordanian had killed 1,000 civilians in Jerusalem, including my father that was injured then. So, what? We did not speak with the Jordanian. During the war we spoke with them. So we have to speak with our enemies. These are neighbors. We are not Americans in Vietnam or Americans in Afghanistan or Russian in Afghanistan, whatever. These are neighbors forever. So we have to talk to them, to try to get them out from this suicide craziness, because they are crazy.
Does anyone in this government believe in that or agree with you, do you think?
I think that during even this war, what was happening, finally they speak indirectly with the Hamas. What is done in Cairo? In Cairo there is a kind of a negotiation. I hope that this government will continue the negotiation. But we have to say to them, we are serious with our readiness to give you a state. But Netanyahu doesn't do anything. The settlements are continuing all the time, and the problem is continuing all the time. So I cannot say that Israel is not guilty in this situation. But of course, the Hamas, when they have a territory of their own, they have to stop violence and try to build. And this will be example for the continuation of the peace process.
I'm tempted to continue with politics because it's so fascinating, but I want to shift to a couple of different directions with the time that we have left. In America, where I'm from, we don't have an Aleph Bet Yehoshua or an Amos Oz, but we do have Philip Roth. And a few months ago, Roth, at the age of 81, I believe, announced his retirement and also said he's not giving another interview. He gave a last one to the BBC, and that's it. And I, as a fan of his literature, was a bit shocked. And I'm just curious to ask you about, do you ever imagine waking up one day and saying, that's it, I've written all my novels, I'm done? Or will you be writing another novel until your last days, Ad Mea V'Esrim, until 120?
Oh, of course, it's very natural, and I can understand totally Philip Roth. Fair enough. I don't want again to quarrel about this, and not to do many novels. It is not a mission. It's not an obligation to write. Create only when you wish and you feel the fire into yourself. If you don't feel the fire, the necessity, don't create. You have enough occupation and sit calmly in your armchair and go to
visit the grandchildren.
To play. I don't know if he has grandchildren.
I'm not sure either, but we were talking about earlier that your grandchildren was what drew you recently, 2 years ago, to move from Haifa, your home of 40 plus years, to Tel Aviv.
Yes, I have 7 grandchildren, and they ask me very much occupation, and I run with them, and I try to help my son, especially my son, my youngest son, who is 40 and have 3 children, was for 1 month in Gaza war. He was there in Gaza war. Imagine.
Was that difficult for you?
He's an officer. We have been so anxious. And we have to help his wife and his children and things like that. And he was there already 40 years old and with 3 children there sitting in Gaza. And I have responsibility here. And I have responsibility to the nasty thing that Israel is doing. I don't believe that the Jew in America, Levinas, for example, and I hope you know the name of the great philosopher.
Of course.
He is responsible to the million Algerians that were killed in the war between France and Algeria. He is responsible as a Jew. No, he says he's French.
No, but I felt responsible as a journalist covering Iraq and seeing the American army occupy Iraq, for example.
Yeah, okay, but you have been responsible as an American, not as a Jew.
True.
Your Jewishness is clean, untucked. You keep it in a very safe place. And here I cannot keep my Judaism clean. Judaism and what we are doing here every day, for good and bad.
It's been so fascinating speaking to you. I know we're almost out of time. I'd like to ask if you would leave us with just a little taste of the retrospective for those of our readers who haven't read it yet and might be interested.
I will read only the end of the half page of the end of the book, because the end is very special. But I will do it with my pronunciation that is not good, and I don't like to read in foreign language, but I will try to do it. Moses approaches the countrywoman who sits in her bed, and with his own hands he takes off her blouse and exposes her breasts. Though this is a countrywoman whose face is coarse and witless, she radiates a true and simple light. And Moses said to her in Hebrew, I know who you are. You are Dulcinea. You are the fantasy. In person, the night capture in the end. And facing a massive breast biscuited by a bluish vein, he struts his hands behind him and declares that only the night of the sorrowful face may bind them. A fragrant breeze blows through the window. Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Moses asked himself. If Dulcinea can feed me, it means she has borne the night a child, and the fantasy of his love is not merely the fruit of imagination. The director brings his lips to the big brown nipple, and through this a country breast, a magnificent breast, he is unsure whether he will find it soft or hard. The woman smiles and squeezes her breast, and between his lips Moses feels a first drop of milk. The milk is warm, strong, sweetish mother milk with a mysterious taste, a hint perhaps of a country dish consumed by the woman. Well then, this is the fantasy. The inspiration I craved has returned. He muses with joy. I am drinking it straight into the chamber of my heart, against the realities that strangles us. My heart is intact. My daughter checked it not long ago. If so, this is my true retrospective, a retrospective meant from the start only for me.
A true and simple light. That was a beautiful ending to the book, The Retrospective. Aleph Bet Yehoshua, we greatly appreciate you joining us here on TLV1.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
It's been a pleasure.
This is TLV1.